I think diverse teams are more resilient teams. I think, a small group of folks who all come from the same background, have the same cultural touch points, they can move hella fast until something happens, or until they try to, someone gets sick, someone gets pregnant, somebody from another culture joins, and suddenly it's like, it throws them off the rocker. Why not just build that in from the beginning?
I'm Rebecca Murphy, and this is Engineering Unblocked. Engineering Unblocked is brought to you by Swarmia, the engineering intelligence platform that's trusted by some of the best software companies in the world, including startups like Superhuman, scale-ups like Miro and Honeycomb, and companies from the Fortune 500. On today's show, I'm talking to Charity Majors. If you haven't heard of Charity Majors, that's impressive. But she's the CTO and co-founder at Honeycomb, and generally a person who generates some really valuable, I don't even want to call them hot takes. They're just takes. They're just true. But she's well known as being willing to say them. So excited to have you on the podcast today, Charity.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and introduce yourself better than I just did.
I mean, I don't think I can. That was fantastic.
One of the things that you're really well known for is the content that you put out into the world about the work of software engineering and building products using software. First, I thought it was really interesting, your talk that you gave at LDX3, the lead dev extravaganza. Is that what the X stands for, maybe? Extravaganza?
I don't know.
That would be perfect. So you gave a talk at LDX3 in London called In Praise of Normal Engineers. And when I was talking to you before we started recording, we were kind of riffing on the value of being able to incorporate normal engineers and new grads into your software development process. So I'm curious, where do you think where has the obsession come from to not optimize for normal engineers, but to optimize for or try to find these 10x engineers? I
mean, it's very human to be looking for shortcuts, right? It's very human. It's very capitalist. It's, and if you could get something done with one person, then why wouldn't you try, And in fact, another one of my personal favorite blog posts that I wrote is called something about every achievement has a denominator. And it's about how if you have 1,000 people and you do something great, good for you. But if you could do the same thing with 100 or 10, I feel like leaders are so often measured by how many people. But I honestly feel like it's really exciting to be able to do things with fewer people. The problem is, there are many problems, but whenever I see a company be like, we want to hire the top 1% or 10%, my immediate reaction is, are you going to pay them the top 1% or 10% of salaries? I know Netflix does. That's a very coherent belief system that they have. Most of us can't afford to do that. And if you can't afford to do that, there's something disingenuous. I am a big believer in doing work that has meaning, but I understand there's a real movement these days to work is just a paycheck, which is being driven by the fact that so many people have had jobs where the employer wanted everything from them and thought that they owed them nothing in return. There's some symmetry here, right? If you can afford to pay people normal salaries, I think you need to be able to make your job function with normal engineers, right? Most of us are normal. And even the people who are I think all of us have met people who just seem like magicians, right? When they're in their sweet spot, when they're one of the best in the world at what they do. But that is rare and it's temporary. Except being exceptional is very specific. You're very exceptional in one specific thing. And as soon as you change teams or change companies or adopt a new framework, you're right back to being pretty normal again. And I would like to destigmatize that.
Yeah, and I think I really got into this productivity space. I imagine you also got into this dev tool space because I'm really inspired by the idea of making normal engineers able to succeed within a system. But I also think that leaders don't always understand the work that needs to be done to make it possible for normal engineers to succeed within a system.
Sociologists call this the fundamental attribution error, where we're constantly looking at individuals instead of the structures around them. And you can't just drop everyone in the deep end with a pile of shell scripts and be like, go figure it out, be exceptional, right? Part of making normal engineers able to do great work is about building systems that make it so that it's easy to do great work.
For the first time, you were the first one to say capitalism. I usually say capitalism first. And this goes to something else I'd love to talk about is kind of how well leadership understands and I'm talking about senior leadership, senior non-technical leadership, especially that your CEO, not your CEO, but that could be your company's CEO or your company's CFO or even the head of sales or marketing could be lacking in understanding of what it takes. Get specific here. What is the work to make it possible for a normal engineer to succeed? Like, what needs to be in place?
That's a very different question than I thought that you were going for. So I kind of want to answer the question that I thought you were going to ask, which is, so if you're a company where you recognize that the value that you're selling, that you're marketing, is being generated by software engineers, what do those senior leaders, what do they need to understand? Or, like, we understand that if you are an engineering leader, you become a manager, a director, a VP, you need to understand things about how businesses run. I don't know that I think that there's the mirror image expectation of sales and marketing and CEOs, but they need to understand things about engineering, because so many things that go into making a high performance engineering work actually sound completely counterintuitive. They sound wrong, especially if you come from a financial background. And like, I think a great example of this is, there's a well-known rule in finance that the same person shouldn't be submitting the receipts and approving the receipts. Makes a lot of sense. Somehow that got ported over into technology and enshrined in law as the same person can't write the code and commit the code, which is so stupid, right? But like, it sounds right, but it's so stupid, right? And I feel, so the recommendation I always make to engineering leaders who are like, I can't read Accelerate. If you do nothing else, every single exec at a tech company should read Accelerate so that they don't accidentally crack down and make it impossible for engineers to do good work.
What are the ingredients that need to be in place?
You need to have CI/CD. You need to have tests. You need to have documentation. You need to have people whose job it is to work on internal tooling, making it easy to use, intuitive. You need to have good observability. In fact, I really feel like the state of the art in observability has come so far over the past decade, and it's kind of a prerequisite. Like, your ability to have a high performing engineering team, what's the right way to put this? The level of excellence you are able to achieve will be defined by the quality of your observability. If you have shitty observability, you can only get so good, right? The better your observability, it doesn't mean you will absolutely then get high performing teams, but it is a gate, right? And also, so those are the main technical things, I think. And then there's also, if you care about having a meritocracy, and I do, you have to care about inclusion first, or else you're just replicating all of society's existing advantages and preferences and enshrining them again in your own company, right? So I think diverse teams are more resilient teams. I think, a small group of folks who all come from the same background, have the same cultural touch points, they can move hella fast until something happens, or until they try to, someone gets sick, someone gets pregnant, somebody from another culture joins, and suddenly it's like, it throws them off the rocker. Why not just build that in from the beginning, right? Why not just have a diversity of levels, a diversity of backgrounds, a diversity of genders, a diversity of parental status, a diversity of, ages? Why not just make it so that everyone feels normal, right? Because there's plenty, I shouldn't have to even say this at this point. There's so much research about how these teams consistently perform better over the long run.
What does create the magical 10x leverage? Not the magical 10x developer, because I don't think they exist, but what does create that magical 10x leverage?
I think 10x is such a like it. I mean, I'm not offended by the idea that there are some people out there who can write 10 times as much code as others. I just don't think it matters because ultimately individuals don't own software. Engineering teams own software. That is the whole apparatus that lets some people get sick, some people get pregnant, some people go on vacation, some people have, everyone have lives, right? It's resiliency, it's redundancy in human form, right? And writing software has always been the easiest part of the software development lifecycle, and only becoming more so, right? So like, I think 10x is, if there's any person or team or company out there that can consistently, not just episodically, but consistently perform 10x greater than their peers, I've never seen it. I think I don't think it's helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like we talk a lot about continuous improvement. It's not like go hire hire 5 10x developers like you have 50 now.
Every week. Yeah.
Every week is so much more powerful than trying to hire that one person. So this kind of leads into another piece of content that you created that, and it's way back in 2020, which I can't, it's kind of wild to think. This was like early pandemic time, right? 10% of the 50 years that we have been building software.
God.
Think of it that way. Don't freak out. But yeah, way back in 2020, early pandemic, before, we entered this post-ZERP period, and when hiring was, that people were hiring, after people completely stopped hiring, people started hiring again like crazy. And a lot of those people don't have jobs now. But I thought it's actually really prescient that you were talking about this in 2020, because I think it was very common in 2020 for very large engineering organizations to be having conversations about developer productivity. Certainly like if you had more than 1,000 engineers, this was obviously on your radar. Maybe it started earlier than that, but it wasn't on the radar necessarily of the companies that had 100 engineers or 50 engineers. And suddenly everybody cares about developer productivity. Not literally everybody, but we are in business because suddenly everybody cares a little bit more about developer productivity than they did. But even back then, you wrote about how, like, if you take the word developer productivity, or the words developer productivity literally, the productivity of a developer, then you said, to the extent you can reduce a job to a set of metrics, that job can be automated away. And I love, right? If we could measure this, we'd have a computer doing it.
The only thing that actually matters is impact to the business. And there are both upsides and downsides, right? I've been meaning to write a new piece about this because I think when I say impact to the business, I think a lot of people feel like their work is unseen there because they're in security but like, then that's not moving the business materially forward, which is another thing I often say, but it is absolutely like contributing to business stability, staying in business, not having terrible things, and I think one of the biggest shifts of the past 10 years is that there used to be a ton of teams and engineers inside businesses that were doing sort of cost center work, right? Keeping the lights on, supportive infrastructure, monitoring, operations, data center. And we have really tried to like minimize those. We outsource those for the most part. For most companies up to a certain size, you really want most of your teams moving the business forward every day in some way that is, product ended. And I think this is neither good nor bad. It just is, right? And it doesn't mean that the people who do that sort of like, I come from the side of the infrastructure, very protecting your downside, very enabling, right? So I get it. It's painful adjustment, but it's real. Which means that something I didn't say in this post, which I'm so glad I had forgotten all about writing this. Sometimes I go to write it and I get through, I'm like, this does sound familiar. Oh shit, I did write this. But I think the number one productivity tip is be working on the right things. And this is not something that engineers can do alone, right? This is something that you have to be plugged in. This is why I hate the whole shit umbrella school of management. No. Your job is to keep your engineers connected to the business, right? To make sure they have the context, understand what they're doing so you guys can push back. And the most devastating work is when the work that you do doesn't actually get used or wasn't worth. That's one of the most depressing, debilitating experiences I've ever had, So I feel like that's one thing I didn't mention. So I just wanted to throw that. You have to be working on the right things, and that means being plugged into the business. But then beyond that, yes, anything you can reduce to a set of metrics can be automated away. And in this blog post, I told the story of one of my early jobs in tech, which is basically kind of Unix tech support, right? And I got so good at closing tickets. My boss thought I was amazing. I gamed the fuck out of those metrics, right? And it wasn't doing anything sinister. I'm just like, well, this is what they're judging me on. So crank, 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 crank. And so I think developer productivity metrics really matter, but you can't reduce it to some predictable set. They're there to help you understand what's happening, not to distort your behavior.
There is a set of conditions required for success in developer productivity, right? And they're very much the same things as the set of things required for success for a normal engineer. But it's interesting that some of them are technical, like you listed, but also some of them are super cultural. Mm-hmm. And so if you are, for example, a team that is being loaded to 110%,
yeah,
as a team, you don't have a lot of your main leverage is to quit, right? As an individual on that team, you don't have a lot of agency over that, or over the interruptions that are coming to your team, or the changes in priorities that are happening. Talking about Honeycomb in particular, how do you create the space for productivity to happen?
Oh God, it's such a good question. It's it always makes me wince a little, because I am immediately thinking about all the ways we do this imperfectly, or stumbled, or failed in the past, or the things that we've realized belatedly but I will say that I think engineering managers are an undersung component of making this all work. For a long time, in the 2020s, in the early 2020s, late 2019s, I feel like it was all the rage to be like, well, we have engineering managers to do the people work, people leadership. We have tech leads to do the technical leadership. And, and if you became an engineering manager, you were told to stop writing code. That's not your job anymore. Don't get involved. And this is a little bit of a tricky minefield to watch, because it does make sense when a new engineering manager, they want to go back to their safe place where they're good at writing code, and you need to sort of forcibly yank them out of that, right? Learn new skills, but I actually think that if you try to separate the people work, quote unquote, from the technical work in a socio-technical system, you're really kneecapping both parties. I think that and with all the caveats that people are complicated and flexible, and lots of different configurations can work. And I'm not saying that this model can't work, but what I see when, you've got a tech lead manager pair, and the manager is not connected to the technical stuff at all, it actually just means that they have to outsource a lot of their judgment about people to someone else's judgment. And that does not give me confidence in that manager's judgment, and if I was someone reporting to that manager, I'd be like, well, now I have two bosses, and if the tech lead isn't in lockstep with that manager at all time, there's just so many. I think engineering managers being deeply technical and knowing what it feels like. They should at least do a ticket every now and then. They should write code. They should know what it feels like to ship. They should know where the friction is. They should be able to go to bat for the engineers who are pillars of their team, whose work is not showing up in the metrics. They should be able to not just say they're awesome, but explain how and why they couldn't have gotten across the finish line without without that engineer, and why the metrics are wrong, right? Or how you should iterate and evolve the metrics to better capture certain kinds of, there's this chain of leadership at every level, right? From the CTO, VP, director, manager. And the manager is the part of the management chain that is closest to the ground. And you have to be able to trust those managers' technical judgment, because it's such a big part of this.
So this is another interesting topic to me, because my own manager journey was I was never going to be a manager. That sounded absolutely terrible. Really awful. Absolutely not. I was going to write code for the rest of my life. And then I got a new job, and I saw that there was a deep need to, they needed like organization centered around front end infrastructure because they didn't have one and it was a mess, and front end was my thing, and that's why they hired me. And so I had this moment of like, I can either try to find a manager I want to work for,
yeah,
or I can just be that manager. Yeah. So I decided to just be that manager. But that means I also grew up in the late 2010s, 2020 time. A lot of managers were growing up out of necessity. My experience is I've only had so many jobs, so my personal experience is only so valuable. But I know I saw a lot of people kind of being pressed into management because we were hiring so many new ICs that we needed more managers.
And a lot of us became managers in reaction to the long string of bad managers we had ever had.
Yes. And I also love to tell new managers, like, the only one-on-one you've ever been in is your own. Yeah. Up until this moment. And so, but I guess I look back on that time and there wasn't necessarily a lot of enablement for the stuff that you're talking about, teaching these managers to do this stuff. And now, now some of these are directors, like, right? And I think that, I loved Camille's book about the manager's path. And that was really like a seminal book for me as I went down that path. But I think that nobody made you read that book. If you didn't read that book, you still got to be a manager. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't listen to the podcast, anyway. So I think that's an interesting component of where we are in technology today, mm-hmm. is that we're kind of paying for the choices that we made. And they were, all choices were good at the time.
We were all doing the best we could. No, I think that's very interesting. I think that the best managers that I've seen from like a decade ago were the ones who were lucky enough to work under someone who they really admired and looked up to. And those people are few and far between. Most of us became managers out of reaction or a desire to protect a desire to be that shit umbrella, right? I became a manager. So I'm like, we all just arrived at Facebook and I'm like, fuck these people. I'll be the manager. I will protect my team from a horrendous Facebook thing. That's terrible, right? But like, I don't know, which is why I don't judge anyone for the reasons they got into management. If it's selfish ambition, you topped out your ladder, you want, like, I don't think it doesn't really matter why you got power. What matters is what you do with it. Right. But I do feel like a lot of us who got into management kind of in a reactionary way, then had to, like, I think we often had this, well, I'm never going to do all these things that I've hated in all the managers. And so then, of course, we made the opposite mistakes, right? Those of us who went through the sort of like Silicon Valley, sleeping under your desk, working, burning your, came out being like, telling everyone, take breaks, pace yourself, take time off. And it took a while for me to realize, actually, some people really don't need to hear this. Some people actually really need to hear that they're not actually putting in enough time, or like you can't manage from a place of reaction. You really have to be connected to the reality of what's going on. And you have to be able to there's a lot that could be said there, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting that with recent layoffs, we've also seen that level is getting eliminated. Mm-hmm. Or is being given such a large portfolio that it's not the job that it used to be.
Whenever people talk to me about their careers and how to stay employed over the long haul, I really emphasize that management will be the first to be eliminated because engineers create value. Nobody else can do that, right? Even with I still stand by, even with all the coding, I still think that if you want to be employed over the long haul, invest in your technical depth and don't get too far away from knowing how to go back and do that. Because I think that's the surest bet to a long career. I think it's great to diversify your skill sets. I think it can only make you a more powerful technologist to spend time on the other side of the divide. And frankly, it is so valuable to have people who used to be managers in your pool of ICs. Because some of the hardest times in your life as a senior leader are times when you can't tell everyone the full story. And there are other people out there straight up lying about what happened. And most ICs, they feel closer to the ICs, right? There's this sort of oppositional relationship with their management, which I get. But you really it's so valuable to be able to have people who have been managers before who can be like, all right, kids, but here's what might be going on. Here's something that if it was going on, they couldn't tell you, right? Here is I just want to rain blessings down upon all of the former managers who are now ICs, because it's such a valuable part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, like as a manager, to have that person on your team,
yes,
who can be that voice. Yeah, it's huge. It's almost like we scripted this, but like we didn't script this much. But like this leads right into our the next topic is this pendulum, this like back and forth and that's something you've really celebrated and championed, just like you just did now. I'm seeing your blog post for, I don't remember when this one was from, but I know it wasn't yesterday. Like I'm seeing that blog post as well, making the rounds as these managers who,
can you believe it? To this day, the most popular blog post I've ever written, which really I love.
It is definitely making the rounds today. I see it routinely in channels about searching for a job from those managers who just got laid off, and trying to figure out like what is their next step. How do you help people get over a fear that they might have that this is like career limiting to go back?
I think it's about investing in your career longevity. I mean, mathematically speaking, there are an order of magnitude fewer jobs available every rung of the ladder that you go up, right? There's about engineers to management, somewhere between 1 in 5 to 1 in 10, managers to directors, there's VPs, CTOs, there's an order of fewer. So, and which is why part of this is always going to be opportunistic, right? Some people are in the right place at the right time and they climb the ladder like nobody's business. Good for them. That a lot of luck went into that, and I think a lot of people try to put themselves in the right, or they chase. I think opportunism is honestly the best career strategy, trying to set yourself up for being, in a place where there's going to be opportunities, but sometimes lightning doesn't strike, right? And if you've got your heart set, you're just gunning to I really think it's limiting. Like, yes, people get paid more at each rung of the ladder, but I feel like those jobs are also more fragile, and it can be a lot harder to find a new job the higher you go up. This is why, if you're like director and above, you only find jobs via like special placement recruiter firms. Like you can't just apply for jobs. A lot of it's word of mouth, very clubby, a lot of like small, because hiring gets very conservative at those levels. They don't want to take risks on people. You can take a risk on an engineer. If you're hiring a director, VP, you are crossing your fingers and praying to God and lighting a candle that this person will be the right person. Like, and I know because I've been hiring these execs, we are also very conservative when it comes to this. You only want someone who's done this before, because the future of your company sits in their hands, right? So I feel like people should be aware of that trade-off, right? And I feel like continuing to invest in being someone who it is not career limiting. Oh my God. It is career extending. You can always find work creating value.
And I'm trying to think back, like 2017. Geez,
I know. Can I tell you a little story about how that blog post came apart? It was a love letter to a friend of mine who was a director of engineering at Slack at the time. He had built it, and he was just miserable. He was so unhappy. And I was meeting up for drinks with him, every other week or so. We were both pretty miserable. But I'm like, your solution is easy. Just go be a principal. And he's like, and I wrote this blog post for him because I was like, I see you becoming more powerful than you ever were before. You're an IC. Everyone knows you. Everyone trusts you. You can write your ticket. And he did. He went on to be a principal engineer, and he spearheaded so many of the Slack technologies that we now love and take for, like a lot of the security stuff, the like multi-login stuff. Like his career just like fucking exploded after that. And so I feel like, obviously I was proven right, and that gives me great joy. I feel like he was like an early canary for like what a lot of people have experienced. Your career is unlikely to take off while you're miserable.
Part of the reason I was trying to go back to 2017 is like hiring was still, we were still in the throes of like hire everybody you can and pay what you have to, and free lunch and all of that. Oh, such good free lunches. Like we were in the throes of that, and I think a lot of people didn't the future was granted.
Yeah.
Like the future was known. They would just keep doing this.
Hypergrowth. Yeah. So many hypergrowth companies.
Again, that blog post has turned out to be really prescient today, when this is not a choice that people are making just because they're miserable, because they're miserable. Yeah. It's a choice that people are having to make to pay bills.
Yes.
And you said like it makes you happy to be proven right. I think like part of why I was so excited to talk to you is you seem to be pretty right about a lot of things in software engineering.
I'm glad you said that, not me. This is a curiosity too.
I will say it, and especially when you remember that, like, yeah, that post was written in 2017. It seems like a few days ago to me. But I think that I love the work that you do to speak out about these things, because I do think that you're mostly right. And I think that a lot of people know these things to be true, but saying it is scary for whatever reason. So what is it that makes it not scary for you to?
I think I have always gotten a lot of joy and pleasure out of being contrary, honestly.
Is it contrary if you're right? Is it contrary?
I don't know. It doesn't bring me any joy to say something that everyone else is saying. Like, why would you say it? Mm-hmm. Like being like, so I think I've mellowed as I've gotten older, but I was very much in that vein, like, But also I feel like those of us who come from the operations side of the house have always been a little bit more reality tethered than the people who are like starry-eyed about the future, which is why I think it's so unusual that I am a company founder. Ops engineers do not start companies because you need a certain amount of reality distortion field as a founder, just the starry-eyed, like the future. And those of us, ops, SRE, are more likely to be like, I hear your bright idea. Here's how it's going to fail. Boop, boop, boop. You're doomed, right? That you're doomed runs deep in me. And it's a complete accident of history that I've turned out where I am. And I've had to company doesn't want to hear that we're doomed. So I really try to but it is deeply weird. And I just want to acknowledge that.
I appreciate your continued correctness. We are about to wrap up here. So my last question to you is, what's your current hot take about the state of the software engineering industry?
I mean, how could it not be about AI, right? That's all everyone's talking about. My hot, unhot take, depending on where if you go to SRECon, then you're probably like, this is obvious. But I think 9 times out of 10, when you hear someone make a statement about AI, you could substitute the word automation for AI and it would be just as true. So there's not a lot of the stuff that AI is bringing to the industry is not new. It's just an acceleration. We're just leaning the complexity of systems, not 10 times out of 10, right? Like the introduction of non-determinism. What does it mean to have an API now? The MCP stuff I think is super interesting, but so much of it is just automation, right? And so the people who are predicting that we're not going to need engineer, oh, you sweet summer child, we're generating more code, more worse code than ever, and so I'm confident that there will be jobs for software engineers in the future, but I do think that, the being tethered to reality is more important than ever. And Fred Hebert, my coworker Fred Hebert, and I gave a keynote at SRECon this spring where, there are people on the product side who are just like, off to the races, everything's going to change, AGI, and then there are SREs who are like, none of it's going to work, blah, blah, it's all going to crash. That's not true either. And my challenge to those people was, we want to be in the conversation. We need to be part of the conversation. Those of us who look on that, what's going to fail, what isn't going to work, but they're not going to bring us to the conversation if we're just doom and gloom, if we're not acknowledging the potential, if we're not acknowledging the amazing things that we are seeing, right? So we have a responsibility to learn and use and try and play around and come along, be in the conversation so that the warnings that we issue land. Everyone's a critic these days. It's not hard to be cynical. I think what's hard is to be a builder, but to be a builder who is grounded in reality and who retains their ideals and their sense of ethical obligations to each other.
I feel like you just gave a talk to my impression of younger Charity.
I think so.
I love it though, and I think that's like exactly, and I think that's been a big lesson to me too over the years. Is like you can't be contrary and be invited to the conversation.
You can't be contrary for the sake of being contrary. You have to be contrary while trying to help get to the future. You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. I cannot believe that the first time I got to talk to you was recorded for the whole world to hear. So here we are.
I feel like we could have kept talking all day. So.
Oh my gosh, I want to talk to you for another hour about all the things that we didn't talk about in the notes.
Part 2 at some point.
Yes, at some point. But this was really amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Of course. And that's the show. Engineering Unblocked is brought to you by Swarmia, the engineering intelligence platform trusted by some of the best software companies in the world. See you next time.